So from our topic, water management should start from the grassroots, we will have, in true high school debating style, have addresses from 3 members of each team, starting with the affirmative and then alternating with the negative. Speakers have 4 minutes to make their case. I will sound an alarm at 3 minutes. There will be no going over time. Debaters will be cut off at the 4-minute mark. And just bear in mind that the debaters may be arguing for cases they don't necessarily agree with. This is an exercise in seeing things from different perspectives. Extra points will be awarded for stagecraft, for drama, for innovation in arguments, and for the use of humour. Points will be deducted for poor timekeeping, unreasonable belligerence. Reasonable belligerence is fine, and for, of course, insulting the adjudicator. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for the affirmative case that water management should start from the grassroots, Dr. Sandra Hall. Sandra is CEO of Water Stewardship Asia Pacific and the Director on the Australian Water Association Board. She's a Fellow of the International Water Association and has worked her career at the interface between science, policy and practice. She is passionate about encouraging innovation, collaboration and passion in the water industry. Sandra, please go ahead.
Thank you, esteemed adjudicator. Ladies, gentlemen, my friends from beyond the binary, and the brave souls who've made the questionable choice to oppose grassroots water management. They're pretty delulu with no salulu. Today I rise not just as a debater, but a humble vessel, like a trusty rain tank filled to the brim with conviction that the water management must, absolutely must, start from the grassroots. And our water, it falls from the sky, it fills our streams, it keeps our beer brewed and our plants vaguely alive. And yet when it comes to managing this most essential of life's ingredients, some folks insist it should be handled only top down. Centralised water overlords armed with spreadsheets, jargons and an unhealthy relationship with acronyms. But let's be honest, have you ever seen a raindrop ask permission from a federal minister to fall? Let's take a moment to remember grassroots people and communities don't just use water. They know water. They live with it. They sing to it. They name it. They even argue with it when it floods their tomatoes. So let me tell you a little story. I like a storytelling, and they told me I had 5 minutes. In the Dong Nai Basin in Vietnam, where rapid industrial growth has put enormous pressure on water quality, we can't wait for the national directive to shift the behaviour. It'll be the factories, the farmers, the fishers who come together through water stewardship supported by the AWP and our partners who are mapping out who is using the water and, shockingly, what they can do about it together. The result, cleaner rivers, reduced wastewater discharge, and people proudly calling themselves water stewardships. Grassroots change. Or take the Murray-Darling Basin right here in Australia. When the water plans came down from above like a flood of bureaucracy, it failed. It was the local irrigation districts, First Nation people and catchments group with multiple cups of tea that figured out what would actually work. It was communities developing site-specific action plans using local knowledge, shared values and good old-fashioned common sense. The result? Improved riparian health, increased trust between the farmers and the regulators, and, a water plan that people want to use. Now, the opposition might say that national plans, big data, hydrological models, to which I say, very impressive. But if your brilliant model doesn't know that old Sam's backyard floods every year because the possums eat through their storm water drains, then you might need a little grassroots information. So, in conclusion, whether it's a multinational beverage company, a local cotton grower, or a regional council, we need a network of water users acting collectively. It's not about ticking boxes, it's about building a water-secure future together. So, my friends, I ask you this: do we want a water policy crafted in a boardroom or co-created on a riverbank? Do we want a future dictated or stewarded? The answer is clear, just like the water we're trying to protect. Water management must start from the grassroots because that's where the water falls, where the rivers flow, and where the people care. Thank you.
Right on time. Points for that. Well done, Sandra. All right, for our first speaker from the negative, Dr. Tarek Kettleson, a very long-standing friend of the show. He specialises, he's an environmental systems engineer, building better relationships between communities and the environment. He's worked across 17 countries, including spending 13 years living and working in the Mekong region. He's now based in Perth and is the technical lead for alluvium in Southeast Asia. Tarek.
Thank you, Michael, and my congratulations to my esteemed debater or debateur over on the other side for what was a beautiful ballad in oratory skills. But I think we need to start here, just look at the question that we've been put towards us, which is water management should start from the grassroots. And what I'm going to argue is two key points that relate to this, to the title. One is start, the word start, and the second part is grassroots, and who's grassroots. So if we just step back a little bit, my background is as an engineer, and I had a chance to have a background in doing some hydrological modeling. And when you're developing models to kind of predict the flow of water and other biota through the water system, your starting point really matters. The initial values that you put in really matter. And you can, if we think of the river behind us here, and we would go to the Virarong Ma, where Uncle Bill was talking about this morning, the walking bridge across the Yarra River. If we were to drop a small paper ship at the middle of the river or to the sides, the ship would end up in a very different process downstream. So your starting point matters for the process that you're going to implement. And this debate is really about the starting points. And what we argue is that the grassroots is important. All those beautiful, colourful, poetic flourishes that Sandra has put on the table, they all are true, they all matter, but they're not the starting point for effective water management. And that's because their perspective misses out on a few things. One, we can't capture a regional big picture perspective that our river basins entail. The Murray-Darling Basin that Sandra mentioned, the Dong Nai Basin, which is where it was the catchment I used to live in for a few years. These river basins have big areas to cover, and their perspectives need to cover a whole range of different stakeholders, which you can't do with a grassroots perspective only. You need to have a framework in place, and that's why we argue that the government does play a central role in this, in establishing a framework, in establishing processes that allow different voices to be heard, not just the voice that can shout louder from the riverbank, with the tomato grower who can, whose fields are flooded the most. It needs to be a fair and equitable framework, and that's where you need somebody else to kind of step in. And of course, governments, if we go back to what governments are meant to do, they're meant to be from the Greek and the Latin words to steer and to guide, coming from the shipping profession. And so government should be steering and guiding these processes. They don't They're not the only voice in the process, but they should be steering and guiding them. Because that relates to the second point that we mentioned about whose voices and whose grassroots. The grassroots of an industrial park in Dong Nai is very different to the fishermen downstream who are suffering from adverse pollution effects from the discharge coming from them. How do we reconcile these kinds of trade-offs without a government intervention? So don't be confused in this debate. Don't try. You'll hear lots of colorful words. You'll hear lots of beautiful imagery about the people and the river and the water. But this is not about choosing between government or choosing between the grassroots. This is a debate that says that we should start with the grassroots. And I think from that perspective, everybody in this room here can see that it's a part, but it's not the start of water management.
Thank you, Tariq. And the fishing 10 seconds. No comment. So, for our second speaker from the affirmative team, Neha Kandakar, as you all know, is the Australian Water Partnership's South Asia Coordinator. She has worked at the intersection between socio-hydrology, climate change adaptation and livelihoods, gender equity and social inclusion. Her research engagements have included work with the the International Water Management Institute, ISIMOD, UN Women and the Planning Commission of India. She holds a master's degree in water resource management and is proudly a relatively new mum. And if you were around last night, you might have briefly met her son. I hope we have another opportunity to meet him in the course of the workshop because he's very, very cute. Neha, please.
Thank you, Michael. My predecessor, Wadi Auckland, Tariq, spoke about equitable frameworks. Let me speak from my experiences of working in the South Asia region. I have often seen, and I can quote hundreds of examples, where top-down schemes with no participatory planning often fail. It's like being a part of a non-consensual toxic relationship. There is no consent, no room for acknowledgement of one's feelings. It never works in the long run. It's forced, leading to resentment and no room for grievances. Without naming names, I can talk about hundreds of modernization of such modernization irrigation infrastructure programs, where in the name of modernization, there is just a lot of harm being caused at the grassroots. There are these documentations which talk about hilarious terms like canal command areas. What is a command area? Command and control approaches, which are legitimized for expansion of irrigation infrastructures. And take a minute to reflect on what we call water as a resource in a lot of these documentations. These terms are laden with colonial baggages, and water is seen as a mere transactional economic entity, not a living and not a living system. It becomes draining to exist in such unequal relationships, where one party is deaf and blind to another's pain, suffering. Rivers don't speak for herself and for her pain. So, of course, communities who live closely with them, the fishers and the farmers, are the custodians in such cases, and therefore their participation in such planning is imperative. But often in planning such frameworks, there are forced signatures and all that you see, and there is no real participation. To complain is to acknowledge one's pain. And while public participation is embedded in planning irrigation project works, as I said, visibility without authority is not empowerment. It is mere disruption. Therefore, grassroots involvement and room for grievances is really necessary. And I would like to enforce this point here. I respect it.
Neha wins extra points for actually giving us a whole minute back. So, to our second speaker on the negative side, Ella Blakelock, given the task of arguing against her AWP colleague, somewhat uncomfortably, I'd imagine, she's AWP specific coordinator. She was previously a senior specialist in the government of Fiji, working in planning, defence and national security policy. She's the former director of the Oceania Policy Bureau in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Fiji, and most recently has worked at the intersection between green growth and climate resilience. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Honorable Adjudicator. Ladies and gentlemen, and respected opponents, I want to make a few rebuttals to the first speaker from the opposing side before I expand on our arguments with 2 points, which is why starting water resource management from the grassroots level is a flawed concept. Yes, you heard that right. It's a flawed concept. Non-consensual toxic relationship with top-down approaches. Wait, that sounds like a personality problem. Water management folks. That being said, all I'm hearing from the other side is that grassroots communities, while know their water, but are they aware of how it interacts with water use in other communities, in the next community, or do they even care? It's human nature to take care of our own interests, right? Respected opponents, if I may just go back to your first speaker as well. The Lulu with no Lulu? I hope so far we've given you a bit to ponder on. Who knows, you might just be compelled to cross the floor by the end. Now, with that out of the way, the 2 arguments I wish to pose against the motion are, the first one is equity risks at community level, and the second one is the importance of enforcing national laws and standards in water management. On equity risks, a critical flaw in starting water resource management at grassroots level is the risk of exclusion and inequity in communities themselves. This is due to existing power dynamics. While grassroots management is often presented as inclusive, as you heard from the other side, reality on the ground is that local decision making is not always representative. I know we all work with partners on the ground. In many communities, traditional hierarchies and gender roles or political influences are more prominent. Thus, as a result, vulnerable groups such as women, children, the disabled, the poor, the landless, these people are left out of decision making about water access and use. So instead of empowerment, studying water management from the grassroots can reinforce existing inequalities in communities. For example, water allocation decisions may favor an influential landowner or the local elites, while small-scale farmers or marginalized household down the road is left out of the way. So starting water governance at community level, it runs the risk of water being an exclusion tool instead of the universal right that it's supposed to be. True equity in water resource management requires oversight, legal, social, and environmental safeguards, and enforcement of national policies that represent all and protect the interests of the vulnerable, which grassroots systems typically lack. This leads me to my second and final point on implementation of national laws. Studying water management from grassroots makes it extremely difficult to enforce national water laws and environmental standards. You heard from our first speaker how water is not local, but one that crosses communities, towns, state, and even national boundaries. Governments create these laws for a reason, to ensure safe and equitable, sustainable use of water across the country. If grassroots communities operate independently, this undermines these efforts. On one region may ban harmful pesticides, while the other region, just a few kilometers down the road, is actively doing it. One community may ration water, while the other one overuses it. This is why we have these laws and standards and the central oversight through national laws for accountability, uniformity, and sustainability. Thank you.
What a For our third and final speaker for the affirmative team on this increasingly tortured topic, Professor Tony Wong, a very old friend of the show. He's Professor of Sustainable Development at Monash University and the pioneer of the water-sensitive cities approach to integrated urban water management. He's a former Civil Engineer of the Year. He's a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Technical Sciences. He is a former winner of the International Water Association Global Water Award and was the inaugural Chief Executive Officer of the Cooperative Research Centre on Water-Sensitive Cities. Tony's also known as Australia's own Where's Wally? Because he's actually easier to find than the Wally character in the books. In fact, Tony seems always to be everywhere. The most dangerous place, in my experience, to stand is between Tony and a grants application process. And if you're in a big room at a conference such as this, looking for someone to influence, just look for Tony, because he'll already be talking to them. Professor Tony Wong, please, will you take the stage?
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I first have to apologize to all of you in that I can't see the number of times I have to roll my eyes every time our participants speak. It's such that I have to lock it back into position with the outrageous claims that are being made about why water shouldn't start from the grassroots. I'll start with my good friend Tariq about being able to see the big picture and crafting your policies for the big picture. And I'll put it to you, how many times have we seen global initiative fail miserably? Agenda 2030, climate action. And the sooner we realize that some of those global ambitions is really a social technical challenge, the sooner we will realize that we need to go to the grassroots for the social. Without actually capturing that, you are doomed to fail. And we have seen multiple failures in all of that. So great capturing the big picture, but having no idea of how you would implement it. That's not water management. That's just policy speak that goes somewhere, sitting somewhere. That is not water management. And then we move on to talk about, in our second speaker here, about equity. Equity. I've touched on the maladaptations of global policies, and we want to talk about equity. Let me give you a story. In Indonesia, there's this huge sanitation program called Sanimas. And recently, the Islamic Bank actually did a review to find that only 5% of the implementation has been deemed to be operating successfully. 5% of a government program. So let me ask you again, where is the equity for the remaining 95% of people? I'd like to make this one final point. It is so easy for us to be speaking for a case because you only need to look around you and you only need to read the theory of change of the AWP. You only need to why? Well, I will leave it to our esteemed adjudicator to tell you the merit of that argument. That the theory of change of the AWP doesn't make it right. But we've heard it from yesterday and today. The advocacy for grassroots assessment, for community-led development. We've heard the story from yesterday about the Murray-Darling Basin and how the clincher was having a cup of tea from the upstream community and the downstream community. A process that my esteemed opponent, Carlin, has been fundamental to. So I will be very interested, Harry, in your rebuttal in how you are going to contribute yourself. So in conclusion, I will leave ultimately the judgment to our esteemed
1 minute, Tony.
adjudicator. The CEO of eWater, the custodian of the Australian Water Partnership, as to whether the strategy for AWP Phase 3 is the right strategy or the wrong strategy. Over to you.
That's what you might call a preemptive attack on the third speaker of the negative before she's even spoken. Nice. Good political move. All right. And thank you, Tony, for your extremely kind words, which have been noted. The Honourable Carleen Maywald is a former Minister for Water Security and Minister for the River Murray in South Australia. She's a former chair of the National Water Commission, a former chair of the International Centre of Excellence for Water Resource Management, director of South Australian Water Corporation, and currently chair of WaterAid Australia. Now, for those who don't know her history, Carleen was a National Party state MP in the South Australian House of Assembly between 1997 and 2010, and leader of the National Party in the state. But she was Minister for Water Security and the River Murray in the Rann Labor government, which made her about as popular in her party room as 15-kilogram European carp in her beloved Murray River. Carleen Maywald, would you please conclude the case for the negative?
Thank you, my dear, dear friend Michael. As an adjudicator, I know you will be very fair and very ethical. I would like to congratulate my colleagues on the affirmative side. Is my microphone working?
I think Tony did that on purpose.
I would like to thank my esteemed debating colleagues on the affirmative side of this debate for their valiant efforts to support that grassroots water management should start at grassroots. Well, I'm going to start with history. Grassroots have been managing water for millennia. In colonisation, we have been allowing grassroots to manage water from the grassroots level, and it has failed dismally. The second step we did was we brought in the engineers. The engineers came along and tried to engineer the solution. The grassroots were left out. The engineers took over. Failure number one. Failure number two was leaving it to the grassroots to try and fix that all by themselves. They can't do it because grassroots is not homogenous. Grassroots is industry. Grassroots is people upstream. Grassroots is people downstream. Grassroots are people from very different backgrounds, very different cultures, who have very different perspectives, and cannot possibly have an uplifting, overarching view of what's fair and equitable, nor can they work with each other for the trade-offs that are necessary when you have competing interests, when you have highly complex systems. I stand before you not as a National Party MP, not as the chair of the National Water Commission or any of the other things I've done. I stand before you as an irrigator at the bottom end of the River Murray system, a part of my community that has been impacted by decisions from the grassroots in other areas of the basin that have left us wanting to water down the bottom of the basin. How can you leave it to the grassroots without having a framework that will enable the conversations to be had, that will enable the trade-offs to be worked through, to enable us to be able to manage water, not engineer water, but to manage water. So grassroots are critically important. We do not argue that grassroots cannot be a part of this. Grassroots are an integral part of it. They have to start. They are a part, and a very important part. The AWP commissioned a very important piece of work called Community Voices, an Australian perspective on engagement and stakeholder and community engagement. There were some fabulous authors of that document. I was one of them. And in that, we interviewed many people. And there was a quote that's coming from the duo, from Hilton Taylor.
1 minute to go.
And I can't get the screen to come up. So I'm going to actually paraphrase. What he said was the grassroots are absolutely integral. But the rub is between the top-down and a bottom-up approach is the ability to actually have access to information, to create the opportunity for conversations that enable water management to be co-designed and co-developed in a way in which government can assist and government can lead and government can steer. We cannot possibly rely on grassroots to do it alone, because that's what we've done through the last 200 years in Australia, and it has failed us. The second failure was bringing engineers in to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. And she came in 10 seconds early. Great, good time. Now, I'm going to need a little bit of time to carefully consider the points made by both sides and total up my awarding of points across the teams. But as I do that, I'm going to ask the panel, the debaters, to reflect on the experience of the debate, particularly those who might have been arguing cases that were contrary to their own beliefs and experience. So I might start with the third speakers, with Tony first and then Carleen, and move to the others. Tony, you go first.
Thank you. And now that we're off debate, I do love you, Carleen. I do want to reflect that it's very difficult to debate a topic that is seemingly non-binary. I mean, the reality is that they do need to come together. High-level policies that create the enabling environment for innovation needs to be there. But innovation is born out of how local contexts can actually be adapted to meet those high-level policies, so that there is that interface. My experience around the world when I see global failures, and I keep coming back to Agenda 2030 climate action, it is really that there's no shortage of global commitment. What is short is that inability to implement those commitments because of our inability to understand local context. And for that, it's great to have to think through that in terms of how the two do need to come together in the work that we do.
I love you too, Tony. There you go. The really interesting thing about this debate is it's actually, I guess, put us in a position to actually think about the broader context in what we are, what our beliefs and what our values are, and put around that the frameworks that are necessary to make things work. And I found it really quite interesting, because when I first read it, I thought, oh no, I want to be arguing on the other side. And then I thought to myself afterwards, actually, the word start at the grassroots is the absolute opportunity for us to explore, well, does it really start there? It needs to start with us acknowledging and recognising there's a problem, and then going out and working with communities to actually co-design, or actually to understand what the problem is first and foremost, and then start to co-design a process that will enable us to work through the issues upstream and downstream and the broader issues between the environment and productive use and the many contested areas in the water space. That can't happen by grassroots alone. And so it requires a combination of the science, the evidence, the academic approach to it, the local community input, the local community driving the agreement on the process, because if you don't get agreement on the process, you don't get the conversations that are required to occur. So you get caught up in people going, the process wasn't fair. But if you can get the process sorted and you get the conversations occurring, at the end of the day, people will come to the conclusion that at least the process was fair. When you have such highly contested areas, not everyone's going to get what they want. And if you start from the grassroots, their starting point is, this is what I want. And we can't meet everyone's needs. And so that's why government involvement, government leading, government guidance is really important. Now, I'm not saying that we've ever got it right anywhere in the world, because that's a work in progress. And we're all working hard on what is the process of government-led initiatives in water management that will work in a fair and equitable way so all voices can participate and that we can have much better outcomes that are accepted by the community, that can be sustainable in the longer term and adaptable to what the future is going to bring us.
Can I just make one proposition?
None of this counts, by the way.
I do want to reflect on government policy, and we are all subscribing to evidence-based policy. But I ask you, where does the evidence come from? And I'm a researcher, whereby where does innovation come from? More often than not, it comes from pockets of work we do at the grassroots to get the understanding that we have that ultimately permeates upwards. You know, Karin absolutely right about setting the processes, but Karin brings to that process a vast amount of tacit knowledge, which is often derived from grassroots works of understanding communities, understanding context. So I still want to urge that it is really important that we do not want policy making in a vacuum. Just no question about that. We want to be evidence-based. But the evidence-based, from my reflection of 30 years in academia, whether in social or in technical work, they always come from early piloting of ideas, and they are all done at the grassroots.
In theory, and that's a wonderful academic assessment of how things happen.
Whoa!
But what really happens in the real world is we have lots of people coming out from Canberra telling us how things should be done. We're meeting in communities, and you know, we've got all of this expertise and knowledge, and we're so brilliant to be part of it upon you. Now, this is the quote. Right? Let's do the quote. When you go into communities, there are always very clear and strong opinions provided on how particular issues can be resolved. However, these views are often only partially informed and regularly don't take account of the impacts of proposed solutions on other parts of the system. The top-down and externally proposed scenarios provided by governments often have a much more holistic view of the issues, while the bottom-up, locally informed scenarios have a more nuanced view of the local impacts. The rub is often neither the local communities nor the government representatives have a good appreciation of each other's points of view. The challenge is how to build the bottom-up, top-down bridge into communications channels, as neither is more right or wrong than the other. And that's from the AWP document, Community Voices. So I encourage you all to have a read. Thank you.
The gospel, of course, is the gospel. Right.
The gospel according to
Arlo, can you talk a little bit about the experience of preparing for participating in today's debate with a topic close to your heart?
Gladly.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to take a little different approach. My learned colleagues, yeah. There's a lot of intelligent people in the room that would probably know better on the technical side of water than me. I'm a non-technical water person. Disclaimer. For me, I guess when it started, when I had the brief to get into the debate, and like Colleen, when I was told to be on the opposing side, I was like, oh, Mama, I'm supposed to be on the other side. I'm not supposed to be here. But then again, you really get what I did, how I did respond at the time was, this is gonna be fun. This is gonna be really fun. And so, yeah, that was sort of the mindset I kept with me preparing for this and getting into the debate itself. So, yeah, I guess having to then look at the topic, just that one word, that open mindset got me to pick up that one word, start. It doesn't start from the grassroots. That was the main argument, I think, for all of us that resonates with the entire team when we did have our discussions, it's that one word, and it's the beauty of, I guess, for me, my personal experience, it's the beauty of having to keep your mindset open. We work in such complex environments and interconnected environments. There's so many different ways to skin a gap if we only let our imagination run wild, and we're able to find the angle we can approach solutions and, I guess, complex solutions to our work. I guess that's my takeaway from this debate. Thanks.
Thanks, Ella. Tara, you're going to
Yeah, I guess for me, I saw the debate question. I didn't actually mind which side of the debate I was on, and I didn't think it was a difficult debate to do because debates are set up to advocate for an answer or a truth about a problem. And as all of you would know, that's not really the context that we're working with in water management. There isn't an answer that we know about how water management should be occurring. Otherwise, if there was such a simple answer out there, then none of the 5 people in here would have jobs, and Michael would be adjudicating some other debate about some other topic. It's not. The point is, we haven't really found a simple solution to this. So you can make arguments for both sides of the debate very well, and I think both sides of the debate have done that. And it's a matter of in that context specific, that river basin, that area that you're working, having the right kinds of principles and tools in place, and making it up as you go along, sort of thing. So I think that's what it comes down to. That's why there's a science to it, there's an art to it, and that's why it's an ongoing problem for all of us.
Yeah.
I will actually build upon something that you said, Tony. 100% structured frameworks facilitated by government, and in Indian law we call government as public trustees of environment. So structured frameworks are certainly required, and government does that job for us. My parents are former bureaucrats and government officials, so I wouldn't have had any of these perspectives had I not interacted with the communities or worked with civil society organizations when I started working in the international development space. So I was completely ignorant myself. So as a researcher, I realized then that these evidences and these stories are necessary to shape those frameworks and structures in a way that they become more fair, I suppose, and there is justice embedded in water sharing and allocation. I think.
And Sandra, you have the ability to reflect as the first speaker of morning on the whole experience, and if you wish, the performance of your colleagues and your opposition.
No, I'd just like to say what a pleasure it was to participate today. I'm very new to the AWP family, relatively new, and everyone's been wonderful. And thank you to the AWP for putting on such a lively debate this morning. It peps you up for the rest of the day. I think both teams handled themselves extremely well. But I would like to focus on the word start. Our opposing team said it many times. So prior to my work with the WhatsApp, I was 20 years at a research institution at the university and worked with many aging male engineer. And can I just say, once you give them something to start, it's very hard to get them to stop. So I want to thank the audience for their participation today. I hope that you found it lively and enjoyable.
Okay, on that topic, I was just interested if there are any questions, observations, or advice from the audience to the debaters for next time we convene a lively debate like this at the next AWP Partners Workshop. Yes, Michelle over in, let me just, could someone run a mic? Thanks.
Can we do on failures, a failcon debate.
You affirmative did that already.
I just think that and this has kind of been fabulous, and I love a debate, high school thing. But so it was fantastic, and I love the fun and the trust, and I like the debate itself as an opportunity to just go to break beyond, the hierarchy and colonialism, blah blah blah, that we all in our suits and all the rest of it. So just broke out of that, and it made us think differently. And I've been a passion of mine for years to have a failcon for water, and I just think there is so much more to learn from our failures than us all getting up talking about how good we all are. But I know that in another famous quote from Carlin, baby steps, Michelle, baby steps. And so I think that a debate would be a great way to just make us break out of this idea of always telling our good stories and perhaps sharing some of our great stories in a really short, snappy time frame, and just help. Because really, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about trust. The reason we can't talk about our failures is because we don't trust. And I was just really touched by the welcome ceremony. It was like, we haven't got spears here. If you're welcomed into our country, no one's going to have a spear, and you are safe. And I was like, that's what we need. That's what we need. So anyway, my plug.
Thanks, Michelle. And we've taken down that suggestion for next year. We were talking yesterday in one of the table groups I was at about how we learn more from failures than our successes sometimes. And also it allows us to speak with more authority and humility sometimes when we talk about our failures. It's something in our culture that perhaps we're not asked to do enough. And it's important to think about that. All right, Rob.
As the representative of the old male engineer, yes, we have been castigated by both sides. I think that we have a right of reply. I'm amazed that you concentrated on the word start and not should. If you thought about the word should and replaced it with can, I think everyone would have agreed. There's the old white stale male engineer's comment.
Anyone else? Okay, no other questions or pieces.
Michael, just on that
yes,
point
Tara.
just on the point about failure, having had a chance to share Australia's water journey, water story overseas with countries in South and Southeast Asia, I can honestly say the biggest traction that we get is when we're talking about the Murray-Darling Basin and we say, we didn't get it right, we really stuffed it up, we failed lots, here's what we learned. That's the best opening of the Australian story that we've got. It's not that we say we've got everything perfect and look how great we are and this is, a breeze to do. It was, we failed at it, we got it wrong. And those countries who are now going through their own journey and their own processes can really identify with that, because that's the hard part. That's what they're scared of, and they realize actually others have done the same. So I just wanted to say that leading with failure is a really good way to work with countries overseas with the Australian experience.
The stories are really good. In Colombia, there was a realisation that there was a Hollywood intent in the water space to actually provide solutions for really marginalised communities and really hard to service communities in Colombia. And one of the things that the NGOs got together and had a big discussion about, well, why is this so? Why is it that 90% of the infrastructure that's been invested in water infrastructure in these regional communities has failed? What do we need to do? So they had a failcon. They talked about what were the failures, and WaterAid participant in that. And the failure came down to when they were investing in infrastructure and not investing in people. And once they started to turn that around and include the investment in people to build infrastructure that was relevant and fit for purpose for those communities using that local grassroots input. It actually changed the dynamic. So the fail-con was the start of the conversation that shifted the normal way that people went about doing business that was obviously not working.
Anyone else on the panel want a final?
You want the answer one?
Okay. I can see you getting restless. Okay, so before I deliver the judgment, there might be room for a People's Choice Award. I haven't quite decided that yet. Can I just hear? I think through applause rather than the show of hands, because a show of hands I don't think is sufficiently anonymous. Applause, please, if you think the affirmative case won, that is Sandra, Neha and Tony's team. Applause. All right, thank you. And applause, please, for those who think the negative case won. That is Tarek, Ala and Carlene's team. Okay, there will be no People's Choice Award. And I'd like just to talk through some of the reasoning, and then I will announce the final winner. The decision not to be contradicted nor challenged. For the affirmative, Sandra's use of flattery was a really good way to open. Use of humour. The authority she projects it, really knowing her subject and her explanation of the concept of water stewardship, I thought were the highlights of Sandra's presentation. Neha, aside from her tremendous use of time, buying us almost a minute, humour, innovation of arguments, command of her subject matter, terrific analogies, even if somewhat sobering, and her narrative on how it feels to be forced into participation in processes, I thought was terrific. Tony, as the third and final speaker, flattery like you wouldn't believe, and his strong support of AWP earns at least one extra point, and especially the familiarity with the AWP theory of change. Well done, well done. Use of humour, innovation in argument, and I thought especially on the innovation side, the preemptive attack on the third speaker who hadn't yet got to her feet was really quite something. So for the negative team, Tarek, very respectful, great narrative about the necessary starting points. Very good innovation in argument and good use of humour. Ala, humour and flattery, which as an AWP team member, she doesn't get quite the points for that Sandra and Tony do, but still, well done, well judged. Very good arguments on power and control. And the point that at grassroots levels, how do you account for organisations that identify their interests differently and therefore spend a lot of time and energy working against each other? And Carlene, finally, as you expect from a former minister, I did expect to have to hold her to 15 minutes rather than 4, but no, she came in right on the buzzer. Animation, passion, humour and flattery, and a magnificent, I thought, sense of forgiveness for Tony's preemptive attack, even though we just saw a little bit of post-debate levelling the playing field And we might see a bit more of that over lunch. And if so, can you please pull them apart? The judgment, I have to say, contrary to the People's Choice Award, I'm awarding it by only half a point to the affirmative team. Well done, everyone, and because of the superior use of time, it looks like we've bought ourselves another 4 minutes for lunch, but I'll defer to Marie-Claire on that. Thank you all. Hope you enjoyed it.